So let me just run through just a few things that have been in the papers this week about Iraq. Of course, the MOD has managed to shoot itself not just in the foot but in the head again this week, trying to cut the compensation for injured soldiers from Iraq as well as Afghanistan. Today we learned that Britain has been forced to pull out its remaining 150 naval personnel from Iraq because Iraq's parliament has failed to extend their right to stay. The mandate allowing British troops to stay in Iraq, of course, expires on Saturday, and there is no new deal in the Iraqi parliament. Today also the Foreign Office announced 2 more of those 5 British hostages who were kidnapped almost 2 years ago are almost certainly dead, leaving 1 possible survivor, although you have to worry about his future. And of course that opens up questions about the government's handling of those hostage negotiations. Meanwhile, troops continue to die in Iraq.
The procurement system is a mess, and it's become such a mess over such a long time, it's almost impossible to stop it now. You have to scrap it all together and start again. Which is the reason we're seeing that they've spent so much money from contingencies, from what they call the urgent operational requirements on buying off-the-shelf armoured vehicles. Most of it will be abandoned at some stage because they'll get out of date. And as we see, the Vikings, they're not providing the protection that is required. So I think Richard's absolutely right about the shortcomings in equipment in Iraq. However, where I do take issue is that the Iraq war, in my view, wasn't lost because of lack of equipment. If it was lost by the British, it was a combination of arrogance, lack of local knowledge, sheer paucity of intelligence, and the continuous mantra, we have been in Northern Ireland, so know what you're doing, which the Americans got very fed up with, quite understandably, after a while. And frankly, at the end of the day, there wasn't the willingness to be in Iraq. I remember speaking to British soldiers before the invasion, when I was in Baghdad, coming back and talking to them, meeting them during the war, when we're in Baghdad, when they come up with the Americans, and then seeing them afterwards in Basra. What was happening in Basra was nothing compared to what we experienced in Baghdad. Waves of suicide bombers coming out of Fallujah to hit Baghdad and other cities. And the British in the south built up a rather strange mixture of complacency and arrogance, because they weren't getting hit so much. They thought they were doing it right. Arrogance, again, because they thought they knew counterinsurgency.
I mean, how difficult is it for you to write about equipment? How interested really are people in bits of gear?
Toys.
Toys. I mean, it's quite
difficult, isn't it?
Difficult to write about that kind of detail.
It's always sexy, is it?
Yeah, that's the trouble. That's the trouble.
It takes an issue like the Snatch Land Rover to get anyone interested. I mean, as soon as you're having a case of soldiers dying, then suddenly it's an issue.
Yep.
But in order to get to that point, the sort of behind-the-scenes, equipment itself is not an interesting.
And is that because the Snatch Land Rover issue seemed like a no-brainer? How can you have something unarmoured like this and so many soldiers dying in it? I mean, is that it's just it's forgive me, but it's an easy issue to grasp hold of for the public and for ourselves?
I guess there is that. I mean, you also saw it in the Americans. I mean, you were talking about how the Americans have this great procurement scheme, which is true, but they equally had their problems, and they were slow to react.
Oh, they did.
I mean, you had like
10 years.
The Humvees sort of driving around with the. I mean, I've been in Iraq since '04, and they had sort of soldiers using their armour to sort of protect them. And I remember driving around as late as 2007, driving around sort of a place called Dora. It's in Baghdad. It was really dangerous. It's kind of a hotspot, wasn't it? And I remember being really scared. I was sitting in a Humvee, and the soldiers could see that I was a bit nervous. And they told me that not to worry, if we hit anything, then the driver would die. The commander of the vehicle would also be very badly and probably die. The gunner would lose his legs, and I'd only get 30 burns.
Reassuring.
Which was reassuring. And then to add to that, I mean, you talked about the rhino, how the rhino detects sort of bombs and stuff. The Americans actually had these, obviously they have these rhinos, but the problem was it is very hot, and they can't run the air conditioning and the rhino as well, so they used to sort of turn off the rhino and keep the aircon.
Right.
So that was good. And another thing about the Humvees is that, you know, you talked about the MRAPs and the massive procurement of MRAPs and how that's really great. A lot of soldiers actually say they prefer Humvees because MRAPs break down all the time. I remember being stuck in the middle of Sadr City in an MRAP that, like, the suspension had gone bust, and we were just like sitting ducks.
Yeah, there's an astonishing sense of denial. I mean, it reached sort of farcical proportions. There was a time when the rifles were, 4 rifles were in Basra Palace, in Saddam's old palace, and they were getting shelled, rocketed every single day. Every single supply run was absolutely hair-raising, because I went on a couple of them, and you know, I can't recall being so scared for a very long time. Now, I just happened to be there, and I was one of the few journalists who got there very, very late. And the reason we got there very, very late was because, not so much the MOD actually this time, Richard, it was the FCO and Downing Street wanted to pretend that Basra was, you know, sweetness and light. You know, they're preparing to pull out of Basra Palace, the deal they'd done with the Shia militias. They'll leave Basra Palace and then hunker down at the airport. And they pretended, or they tried to pretend, that they're leaving Basra a peaceful place. Now, the first question that the Patrick Sanders guys from 4 Rifles asked was, you know, why is it that you guys have been writing endlessly about Helmand, which we have been, because that was a new war. That's where we have been rather than Iraq. And what's been going on here to us has not been reported. And the reason it wasn't reported was because the government, in this case led by the FCO and Downing Street, basically tried their best to prevent access by the British media, or any media for that matter, to go into Basra at the time, to see that you know, Basra Palace was a miniature Dien Bien Phu getting hit every single day. I just want to add one very quick point, which is that if the whole question of counterinsurgency, now whether we like it or not, we'll have to, not we personally, but the troops certainly in Afghanistan now, will have to depend less on equipment. And if you look at the Petraeus plan, the Kilcullen plan, and the one that General McChrystal, who's now the NATO commander in Afghanistan, is working out, is basically, you know, the very simple matter of having boots on the ground. You know, not just taking a place and withdrawing and then calling in airstrikes. You know, it's a question of, you know, going there and staying there, which is going to be much more risky. Invariably, there will be more casualties, more fatalities. And the whole idea about, as Kilcullen was explaining the other day, you know, was basically, you know, the whole question of civilian casualties is so important in Afghan minds at the moment. And the more airstrikes you have, the more chance of them happening. It's not done out of malice, it's done out of mistakes. And thus, if you stop doing that, if you stop using airstrike that much more, then you're going to have to have more boots on the ground. And that means that troops will have to take more risk. That means they'll be on the ground and they'll be much more vulnerable.